Okay, welcome to Graphs of Sine and Cosine, Part 1. Okay, so before you've drawn graphs of it, we've looked at this one cycle of a sine graph, right? Goes up, goes down, and stops. Wherever it stops, that's called the period. And then we've got these points here. One's a maximum and one's a minimum. Those are kind of the basic things we talked about. And then on the worksheet I gave you, one of the questions it asked for was the range. A couple of people stumbled on that because they couldn't remember what range was. Well, it's the lowest y to the highest y. So it's from -1 to 1. That's interval notation with brackets because they're included. Or you could have written it with inequality notation and it would look like that. The one thing I didn't ask you about though was domain. Now, domain is all of the all of the x's. Now, looking at the graph right here, this first one that I drew, it looks like it only goes out to 2 pi and only from 0. But if you remember, we talked about how these graphs, sine and cosine, are periodic or cyclic, meaning they continue going on forever and ever. So you make one cycle and then it'll follow with another cycle and so on. Same thing in the opposite direction. It just keeps going on forever and ever, which means our domain for these guys, sine and cosine, are all real numbers. Now looking at this picture, the maximum happened at pi halves and 1. And the minimum happens at 3 pi halves and -1. And then if you finish looking at the graph, you've got 3 intercepts. You've got an intercept here, here, and here. So intercepts are at 0, 0, pi 0, and 2 pi 0. That's for sine. Those are the main characteristics of these guys. You're going to end up having to graph them, and that's how you do it, is by these guys right here, the max, the min, and the x-intercepts. Okay, as far as cosine goes, they again have the same domain. They also have the same range. The lowest point is -1. The highest point is going to be 1. Sorry, I had to make sure I didn't mess up. Now, though, as far as max, min, and intercept goes, they have opposites. On sine, it started at 0, 0. For cosine, it actually starts up here at the maximum. So that one happens at 0, 1. The other maximum, so maximum here, it starts at a maximum, which means it's going to end at a maximum because that's how one full cycle goes. So the other maximum happens at 2 pi and 1. Okay, the minimum happens in the middle right here. So it's at pi -1. And then your intercepts are going to be at pi halves and 3 pi halves. Pi halves 0, 3 pi halves, and 0. Now I'm going to look really quick at these numbers. We've got 0, 2 pi, pi, pi halves, and 3 pi halves. And if you look back here at sine, notice that they have all the same important pieces, same important numbers, 0, pi, 2 pi, pi halves, 3 pi halves. It's all the same key pieces on there. The only difference is what actually happens on the graph at those points. And that's kind of the key to these. So for sine, you need 5 key points of the sine graph. Those key points are the intercepts. Okay, it starts at an intercept and it ends at an intercept. And then there's also an intercept right here in the middle. So this is where the graph starts. Here's where it ends. And this right here is the middle. So wherever the graph starts, there's an intercept. Where it ends, there's an intercept. And there's also one in the middle. Okay, the rest of the pieces are the max and min. So it looks like the max happens right here, which is between the start and the middle. Okay, see how this right here is halfway in between those guys, which means this minimum over here happens between the middle and the end. 5 key points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3 of them are intercepts at the start, middle, and end. The other 2 are the maximums and the minimums, and those happen in between those intercepts. Now cosine, of course, is different. This time it starts at the maximum and ends at a maximum. So at the start and the end, and the minimum is what happens in the middle. So again, here's your start, out here's your end, and this is your middle. And then your intercepts actually happen betweens, right? So the intercepts happen between the start and the middle, and between the middle and the start. Stand. What in the world is that? Let me try that again. Okay, magic. Bam, now it looks beautiful. Okay, 5 key points. Again, this is the key to graphing these guys. All you've got to do is get the 5 points labeled on your number line, 0, blah, 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 and then pop in the pieces based off of where they happen with sine versus cosine. Okay, here's an example. So we talked last week about these basic graphs, right? They look like this. A cosine of bx plus d, where d was the midline, which these examples, we're not going to deal with those yet, next time. But then you also have this guy in here, a, which is the amplitude, and this b right here changes the period. It is not the period, it changes the period. So that change in the period is that P equals 2 pi over B. All right, looking at this one right here, we need to know our A, our B, and then we'll compute our P. So cosine of 2x, your A is the number out in front, so it's going to be a 1. B is this number in front of the x, so that would be 2. And then the formula for period says 2 pi over B, which is just pi. Okay, so here's the graphing part of it. On your graph, first thing, got your 0 here. Count out 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. At the last line right here goes your period. Whoops, sorry about that. Slight disruption. Okay, so we've got our period happens right here. And then to get the rest of your units, the trick is to take the period and divide it by 4. We're going into 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. So that would be pi over 4. And that's going to be your first guy right here. Now you just count. That one right there was 1 pi over 4. So think of it as 1/4. Then the next one would be 2 pi over 4, which reduces down to pi over 2. And then 3 pi over 4, and pi at the end, 4 pi over 4 technically. Okay, now let's talk about our up and down labels. Vertical, sorry, your y-axis. This amplitude right here says the highest it's going to go is 1, and the lowest it's going to go is -1. Now I'm going to call this 1, even though it's 2 lines up there, just so you can see the whole graph. It'll look tiny if I do it right there. Okay, 5 key points.